Israel. So today in this video, we're going to do a climate check. We're going to examine and notice what the leaders of this nation are doing to the children of Israel. And we're going to make sure that we understand what time it is.
Just have to say, thanks for the endorsement, Bill. Took you long enough.
Oh, snap!
Sorry, Hillary. I was running on CP time.
That's not, I don't like jokes like that, Bill. That's not funny.
Cautious politician time.
We're going to look out and we're going to be able to see the storm that's brewing so that we're not taken off guard or by surprise. Now, I'm just sharing information to raise awareness. It is not to make you afraid. And together we're going to work on learning scriptures and make sure that you're studying scriptures. Anything that deals with conquering fear, being bold, make sure that you meditate on those and get that deep down inside of you so that you are able to stand in the times that are laying ahead for us. Make sure that if you have children or if there's anyone in your life that you're influencing, that you also work on building confidence and boldness and faith in the Most High, and in knowing that Yeshua is coming back to deliver our people. But we're also told to watch. We need to be aware. We're told to, when we look out and we see the storm clouds gathering, we know that a storm is near. So we need to understand what time it is, the climate of the world that we live in. And that's what this video is going to be pointing out. The time of Jacob's trouble is basically approaching. I mean, you can look out and see it on the horizon. And that's why when you see my videos and you see me, you see where it says, make it into the kingdom. What that is about is, we all know Yeshua is coming back. The kingdom is coming. And we need to make up our minds and have it set in our hearts and instill it in our children and instill it in our friends and our family and our loved ones to make sure that come hell or high water, it is in you to do nothing more than make it into the kingdom. Meaning, if we are ever separated, because when these times come upon us, unfortunately, a lot of us are going to be separated from one another. And knowing that we will see each other again in the kingdom, it gives us hope and it gives us something to fight for. And the best thing that any parent can do, the best thing that anyone can do, any loved one, any friend, family, sister, brother, mother, father, aunt, uncle, anyone, the best thing you can do for them is to point them into the direction of the kingdom. Point them into the direction of the Savior, to look for the blessed hope of Yeshua coming back for his people. There are times ahead when they come upon us. We need to be ready. We need to be prepared to stand in the face of adversity. And we need to know that we have equipped our community and our family and our loved ones to be ready. And know that it is not the end, but it is only the beginning. Okay? So the best thing that we can all do is ultimately make sure that we all develop tunnel vision and an obsession and a determination to all meet up in the kingdom. If we are ever separated, we will make it into the kingdom. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and do a climate check. Let's look at what is going on in the world and what they are doing to the children of Israel. We're going to start with Psalms 83, verse 3. And they have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. Israel, I just wanted to draw your attention to something that we really need to be keeping a very close eye on. And that is the time of Jacob's trouble. It's drawing very near. And when we examine Psalms 83, verse 3, we have to keep in mind that this is a living word. It's not something that they've just done in the past. It's something they've done both in the past, and it's something they're doing even in the present. So we have to keep in mind that behind the scenes, Israel's enemies are still plotting against us. Our enemies are still plotting against us. And they're very smart and very crafty in how they're going about it. So here are some things that we're going to examine. Let's go ahead together. We're going to examine their schemes so that we are already ahead of and knowing what they're doing to us. One of their first schemes is the illegal immigration. With the illegal immigration, a lot of us, hopefully we're not missing this. And if we are, it's okay. That's why I'm bringing it to everyone's attention. Obviously you cannot have lived in the United States over the last few years and not have noticed all of the rhetoric and all of the attention that has been going to illegal immigrations, especially against Mexican people. And I do empathize with the immigrants that have experienced deportation. And I personally, especially as an Israelite and according to scripture, we are supposed to welcome the stranger among our borders, or welcome the stranger among us. So I personally am pro helping anyone who really needs help. I really do empathize. I think it's a terrible thing. And I think that obviously, especially Mexicans, were coming to the United States for a reason. When an immigrant is immigrating to the United States, they're doing it for a reason. I do empathize with the struggle of being an immigrant in the United States, especially when they are not here legally. But even though they are definitely experiencing some hardships, understand that this illegal immigration is just a crafty way to plot against the true children of Israel. Now, I know that that might sound a little odd and, makes you want to raise your eyebrow, but you want to hear me out. And so the purpose of all the heavy focus and the aggressive attacks on Mexicans and many of the other immigrants was done in an effort to buy time, also to misdirect people from their secret agenda, and to use illegal immigration as a way to introduce new legislation against the true children of Israel. So, of course, like I said, I'm sure you're thinking, what would make me say such a thing like that? Well, here's what we have to understand. Illegal immigration is basically being used as a launching pad. And what it did is it paved the way for new laws to be introduced, for them to consider implementing certain types of legislation. And one of those legislations that they've introduced and they're considering is the birthright citizenship. It's supposed to prevent immigrants from illegally coming into the United States to give birth. And if this law is passed, children born to illegal immigrants will not be considered as citizens of the United States. But it doesn't stop there. See, this is where they're being crafty, because if that law is passed, that also brings into question the legal status of African Americans. This is why you have Ben Carson and former President Barack Obama implying that, African Americans are the descendants of immigrants.
A land of dreams and opportunity. There were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder for less. But they too had a dream.
It wasn't always easy for new immigrants. Certainly it wasn't easy for those of African heritage who had not come here voluntarily, and yet in their own way were immigrants themselves.
And it created a great uproar, but the purpose of it was to draw that connection. Now, African Americans were never made citizens of the United States. So if their birthright citizenship is taken away, then they're going to be in a world of trouble. We would be in a world of trouble. So yet again, what we see is the fulfillment of Scripture. That is just one crafty way in which they have taken counsel against us. Through illegal immigration, they have used that as a pathway and a launching pad to come in and make our citizenship in the United States questionable. But they're not done. So let's examine some other ways that they take crafty counsel against the children of Israel, the hidden ones. So let's examine the counsel. So of course, we have the President of the United States. It's no secret how he feels towards the Black people, Negro people, African Americans, whatever you want to call it. It's not a secret how he feels about us. But let's examine the people, his council of people that surround him. For example, we have Stephen McAllister. Now, President Trump selected him for U.S. Attorney of Kansas. The thing with Stephen McAllister is that he agrees with what's called the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision is basically known as Dred Scott case, and this was a landmark decision by the United States Supreme Court on U.S. labor law and constitutional law. And it held that a Negro whose ancestors were imported into the U.S. and sold as slaves, whether enslaved or free, could not be American citizens and therefore had no standing to sue in a federal court, and that the federal government had no power to regulate slavery in the federal territories acquired after the creation of the United States. So Dred Scott, an enslaved man of the Negro African race, who had been taken by his owner to free states and territories, attempted to sue for his freedom. But in a 7-2 decision written by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, the court denied Scott's request. The decision was only the second time that the Supreme Court had ruled an act of Congress to be unconstitutional. Ultimately, what it's saying is that Black people that were the descendants of imported slaves, whether they were free or slave actually, were not allowed to be citizens. So Stephen McAllister agrees with the Dred Scott decision of March 6, 1857, that Black people are not citizens. And again, he's selected by the president for the U.S. Attorney of Kansas. Then we have Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General selected by President Trump. And Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is basically over the Department of Justice, which includes agencies like the FBI, CIA, DEA, and things like that. Now, the FBI has been focusing in on what they would call Black identity extremists. Basically, it's targeting and heavily monitoring what they call Black identity extremists. And first thing you want to notice with the Black identity extremists is that when you put the abbreviations together, you get BI. It makes you think of BYE, which to me that is a very subliminal, like bye. What are you trying to say? Bye to Black people? Are you trying to get rid of us? Maybe that's just how my mind works. But nonetheless, I found that one interesting. The acronym itself spells BI in reference to talking about the Black identity extremists. I have the link below. You want to go ahead and if you want to view it. And this will give you all the information on what they're telling, how they define Black identity extremists. And it is vague enough where it could be anybody. Ultimately, if you are Black, whether you know you are an Israelite or not, if you are Black, you can easily be labeled as a Black identity extremist if you believe in being a Moor, if you do not like police brutality against Black people, if you are pro-Black Lives Matters, you name a Black organization, similar to how they did the Black Panthers. And they are monitoring us, yes. So my Hebrew brothers and sisters, You are being monitored. I know I am being monitored. That's just the temperature and the climate that we live in. We still have to do what we have to do for the kingdom, because that is what is going to last forever. But I want you to be aware of what's going on. They are watching us. They are paying attention to us, just like they did Dr. King, just like they did Malcolm X, just like they did the Black Panthers, just like they did Huey Newton. The only group of people that I have ever known in my entire life that are not allowed to be proud and know who we are. We're the only group of people that are not allowed to speak out about injustices. And as soon as we get too out of pocket, just by being confident, I'm not even talking about being violent in any way whatsoever. The fact that we would gather together and have a sense of pride of who we are. And of course, just a lot of black groups. So if you are in any type of black group whatsoever, first of all, you're all Israelites, whether you know it or not. But nonetheless, if you are pro any black organization, you're being watched and monitored. Remember, our identity was taken from us. So when we fill out a form about what is your ethnicity, we never get to select Hebrew on that form. We never get to put Hebrew Israelite. We can't, that's not an option. That's why they have to give us a month so that they can reinforce and reprogram our thinking to say, this is who you are. Since we are waking up, now we are considered black identity extremists. So we have Jeff Sessions to thank for labeling us as black identity extremists. Bye. Now we also have Mr. Ben Carson. He is a U.S. Attorney of Housing and Urban Development, also selected by President Trump. Now, of course, as everybody knows, he has absolutely no experience in this area, and he's going to be implementing massive cuts to funding for HUD housing and has absolutely no information to provide about this massive amount of funds that will be cut. Let's check him out.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witness for appearing as well. Mr. Carson, Mr. Secretary, Dr. Carson, sir, you have indicated that there will be substantial cuts to the budget that HUD has. Can you give me that dollar amount? I'm showing that it's about $6 billion. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Is that about 13% of the budget?
Yes.
And will these cuts, Mr. Carson, come from public housing, housing vouchers, community development block grants, and other aid to low-income persons?
They come from a variety of sources, including...
How much from public housing, Mr. Carson?
Probably in the neighborhood of, if you combine all the programs, 2 to 3 billion.
2 to 3 billion. How much from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Rather than go through a quiz on all the numbers...
It's not a quiz, Mr. Carson. I have the time to ask you questions about things that you should have some knowledge of. If you have no knowledge of them, you can simply say so. I'll accept it as an answer. But this is something that's within your bailiwick, my dear sir. How much from housing vouchers?
Again, I can give you that number, but...
Well, if you would give it to me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I'd like to go on to community development block grants.
Well, here's my point. I agree with you that it's difficult to do these things.
That has little to do with my question. You're answering a question that I'm not asking, to be quite candid with you. So would you kindly tell me how much how much you're going to cut from the HUD budget as it relates to housing vouchers? Now, if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know, Mr. Carson. I don't hold you to things that you don't know. How much are they going to cut?
Let's just move on and say that I don't want to offer a number because it's subject
Why
to...
would the Secretary of HUD not give the number, the amount that you're cutting from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Because
you're the Secretary of HUD.
Because
you're making the cut.
Because we've already talked about the total amount of the cuts.
Well, the total amount does not help me when it comes to the housing vouchers. I have people who use housing vouchers, and I need to be able to explain to them, Mr. Carson, how much the cut portends for them. How much, Mr. Carson?
Let's hear your number.
Well, Mr. Carson, forgive me for coughing while speaking, but Mr. Carson, you're the witness testifying today. And if you want a moment to ask someone behind you, I would gladly accord you that moment.
I don't want to open the book and look at the numbers.
I see.
I
So you
wanna- I
choose
wanna-
not to say how much you're cutting from housing vouchers, or how much you're cutting from community block grants, Mr. Carson.
I want to talk about.
Mr. Carson, you don't get to talk about what you want to today. You get to talk about what I want you to talk about. You get to answer the questions that I pose, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, but I
That's the
also
way
get
it
to
works.
answer the question the way I
Well,
want
you
to.
can answer them the way you want, but if you want to show a lack of knowledge, you can do this. It's quite all right, Mr. Carson. So now, how much from community development block grants, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I'm not willing to sit there and.
So
go
you
through
don't
that
know
list.
how much from community development block grants?
I'm not going to go through the list. This much, and this much. I think that's
I don't.
not.
I'll move on, Mr. Carson. I accept your lack of knowledge.
Okay, and in addition to that, there's also gentrification that's going on. And for people who are not familiar with gentrification is a process of renovation of deteriorating urban neighborhoods by means of the influx of affluent residents. This is a common and controversial topic in politics and urban planning. So in English, or in other words, what it is they go into poor neighborhoods and they run out the poor people, and rich people or people with money, and they basically run out a lot of the poor and undesirables out of the neighborhood. More specifically, yes, especially in poor black neighborhoods. And if anyone, I don't know if other people have noticed it, but that is happening. This is something that I know people personally who have experienced in places where I have once grown up, is undergoing gentrification, which means that they are taking back the cities. They're making America great again, or white again, whatever you want to call it. So cities are being taken back and black people are being pushed out of their communities, and they are being very crafty. Okay, and then the last crafty council that we have is Omarosa Meganault. I don't even know how to say her last name, but it's really not that important. She's the director of African American Outreach. She also has been selected by President Trump. I don't think I have to say much about her. If you've watched anything on television, she's just a horrible human being. And she used to be a pastor on top of that. Weird. Nonetheless, yeah, I don't think I have to say much about her. You know, every brother isn't a brother. Every sister isn't a sister. Yeah. And she's actually quoted for saying it's better to be at the table than on the menu, concerning her own people. So these are the people, and these are just a couple of the names. There are obviously many more, but these are the people who are giving counsel to the President of the United States. People who support the fact that black people should not be citizens. The president himself, who feels that citizenship birthrights should be removed, which then would displace and take away citizenship from so-called black people. We have someone named Ben Carson who has absolutely no experience with housing and urban development, and massive cuts are coming, and he will not say anything about it. I don't know if he's playing dumb or what. So that's what we have. And then we have Omarosa. I mean, enough said on that. All of these people are using crafty ways to displace the children of Israel from their homes. We have Jeff Sessions, who's labeled black people as black extremists. This is what we have. Israel, be careful. They're starting to marginalize us. You want to look up what happened with Hitler. I do believe that there's a lot we don't know about Hitler. I do believe that, the winners tell the story and Hitler lost. But I also understand that there is a blueprint and there is truth. I don't believe the whole Hitler story is a lie, but I believe that Hitler was the fall man. Nonetheless, I believe the Zionists were definitely behind a lot of the persecution that happened to the Ashkenazis. But nonetheless, pay attention to what happened, because history repeats itself. Sometimes I think that was just a dry run for the real thing. Just like black people are being marginalized. And he started by marginalizing Mexican and immigrant people, calling them criminals and saying some horrible things about them, things that can also be easily transferred over to the identity of black people. Israel, it's time for us to get ready and prepare and make sure that we make it into the kingdom. All right, thank you, and I really do love you, and take care.